Welcome.
Have you ever heard of a story so daring it seems impossible? Today, we dive into the shocking trick of an enslaved man in Georgia 1859 who managed to blind 19 overseers using his cunning and courage. Before we get into it, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and make sure to subscribe. We've put in countless hours uncovering every true detail behind this incredible story. Georgia in 1859 was a place of stark contrasts. On the surface, the plantations stretched endlessly, with rows of cotton and tobacco fields glistening under the southern sun. Wealthy plantation owners lived in large, elegant homes, showcasing their power and status. But behind this picturesque facade, a dark reality thrived. Enslaved men, women, and children worked under brutal conditions, their freedom stripped away, their lives controlled from dawn to dusk. The economic prosperity of the region depended entirely on this system of oppression, which left deep scars on the land and its people. For the enslaved, daily life was grueling. From before sunrise, they labored in scorching heat, tending crops with minimal food, little rest, and constant surveillance. Any resistance, no matter how small, was met with harsh punishment. Overseers, tasked with enforcing compliance, often relied on intimidation, beatings, and psychological control to maintain order. Families were frequently separated, and hope was a scarce luxury. Yet, amid this cruelty, enslaved people found ways to preserve their humanity, culture, and spirit, often through secret acts of defiance and solidarity. The social hierarchy was rigid and deeply enforced. Plantation owners wielded near absolute power, not just over the land, but over the lives of those who worked it. Enslaved individuals were seen as property rather than people, and the law supported this view. Punishments were public and designed to instill fear, creating a climate where survival often meant careful planning and cautious rebellion. The fear of punishment and the omnipresence of violence made every day a struggle, but it also set the stage for acts of extraordinary courage and cunning. By 1859, tensions in the southern United States were rising. The country was inching closer to civil war, and ideas of freedom, resistance, and rebellion were spreading among enslaved communities. Stories of escape, sabotage, and clever tricks against overseers circulated quietly, inspiring hope and daring. In Georgia, these stories were especially potent because plantations were large, overseers were numerous, and the stakes for rebellion were incredibly high. Every small act of defiance carried immense risk, but also a powerful message. Enslaved people were not powerless, and some were willing to take extreme measures to assert their agency. Understanding this historical setting is crucial to appreciating the story of the enslaved man who would later blind 19 overseers. The dangers he faced were unimaginable, yet the oppressive environment also sharpened his mind and determination. This was a world where survival required intelligence, bravery, and sometimes audacity. His story is not just one of revenge. It's a testament to resilience and the relentless human spirit in the darkest corners of American history. The man at the center of this story lived a life most of us can barely imagine. Every day was a struggle for survival, dictated entirely by the whims of those who held power over him. From sunup to sundown, he worked the fields under relentless heat, performing back, breaking labor alongside dozens of others, yet he was constantly watched. Overseers patrolled the plantation, whips in hand, eyes sharp for the smallest sign of defiance. A single mistake, a moment of hesitation, could lead to brutal punishment or worse. Life was a constant balancing act, working hard enough to avoid suspicion, but always mindful of the dangers lurking in every corner. Despite this, he was no ordinary laborer. Observant, patient, and cunning, he noticed patterns in the overseer's behavior that others overlooked. He watched how they walked, where they paused, how they interacted with the enslaved workers, and what routines they followed each day. This careful observation became his survival tool. Every glance, every small gesture was a piece of the puzzle, and over time, he began to see opportunities where others saw only oppression. It was in these quiet moments of awareness that he nurtured a plan that would change everything. Life under overseers was psychologically exhausting as much as it was physically brutal. Fear was a constant companion, yet it was also a teacher. He learned when to speak and when to remain silent, when to act submissive and when to assert himself subtly. These lessons were not just about survival. They were about gathering intelligence, testing boundaries, and understanding exactly how much he could risk. His mind became a weapon, sharpening with every day of vigilance, every small act of resistance, and every chance to outsmart those who sought to control him completely. The enslaved community around him also played a silent, vital role. Fellow workers shared warnings, rumors, and sometimes small acts of help that went unnoticed by overseers. Bonds of trust and shared suffering created a network of quiet resilience. Through these relationships, he gained insight into how overseers reacted to fear, anger, and surprise. The plantation was a dangerous chessboard, and every person, every observation, every whispered conversation could become a piece in a larger strategy, a strategy that required patience, precision, and nerves of steel. By understanding both the oppressive environment and the subtle dynamics among the overseers and enslaved workers, we can appreciate the full brilliance of his actions. This was not a rash act born of anger. It was the calculated result of years of careful observation, mental fortitude, and sheer courage. The story of this man challenges our understanding of slavery because it shows that even in the most controlled, dehumanizing conditions, the human spirit could find a way to fight back, not blindly, but with intelligence, daring, and a boldness that would leave a mark on history. Every story of rebellion begins with a spark, and for this enslaved man, it was both fear and frustration that fueled his courage. Day after day, he witnessed the overseer's cruelty, whippings, punishments, and psychological torment inflicted on anyone who dared to resist. He saw friends, family, and strangers suffer for the smallest perceived offense, and he understood that staying silent meant complicity in a system that thrived on suffering. His motivation wasn't born from impulse, it came from a deep, simmering awareness that change, however dangerous, was necessary. But his drive was also personal. The overseers weren't just faceless enforcers, they were constant threats to his life and dignity. Each encounter left scars, not just physically, but mentally. Every harsh word, every aggressive gesture reinforced the reality that he was trapped in a system designed to crush his spirit. Over time, this constant oppression ignited a desire not merely to survive, but to reclaim some measure of power and control in a world that had stripped him of it. His plan was more than revenge. It was a statement that even in bondage, he refused to be powerless. The enslaved man also understood the psychological impact of fear. He knew that striking back at the overseers would not only serve as personal justice, but could also inspire hope among others. Trapped in the same brutal system, this was a calculated form of resistance, one that would shake the overseer's sense of invincibility and disrupt the rigid hierarchy that relied so heavily on intimidation. Motivation in his case was as much about empowerment and sending a message as it was about survival. Another factor in his motivation was necessity. He was aware that his life and the lives of those around him depended on clever thinking and bold action. The plantation system offered no protection, no legal recourse, and no mercy. In such an environment, daring plans weren't reckless, they were a form of strategy. He realized that subtle defiance might offer temporary relief, but only a bold, calculated act could truly alter the power dynamic, even if only for a moment. His mind became a battlefield where careful observation met a burning desire for justice. Ultimately, his motivation was a blend of fear, outrage, strategy, and courage. He wasn't acting out of random anger. Every step of his plan was driven by a deep understanding of oppression and an unwavering determination to assert his agency. This story reminds us that even in the darkest moments of human history, individuals found ways to resist and reclaim dignity. The enslaved man's audacity is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a spirit that refused to be broken, even when faced with unimaginable danger. The key to any successful plan, especially one as dangerous as this, begins with observation. Our enslaved protagonist didn't act impulsively. He watched, analyzed, and memorized every detail of the overseer's behavior. From the way they paced through the fields to how they interacted with the enslaved workers, nothing escaped his attention. Every whistle, every shouted order, every pause in their routine became a clue. These small details, seemingly insignificant to the overseers, would later become the foundation of his daring strategy. He paid close attention to patterns in their daily activities. Overseers often followed predictable routines, walking certain paths, taking breaks at specific times, and even favoring particular tools or positions of authority. By memorizing these patterns, he could anticipate where they would be at any given moment and identify vulnerabilities. The plantation, with its sprawling fields and hidden corners, became a map of opportunity. Each observation brought him closer to understanding how to turn the overseer's confidence into their downfall. Not only did he study physical movements, but he also studied their personalities. Some overseers were quick, tempered, others lazy, and some relied heavily on fear to maintain control. By identifying their weaknesses, he could tailor his actions to exploit them most effectively. This wasn't just careful planning, it was psychological warfare. He was learning not only how they moved, but also how they thought, how they reacted under pressure, and what would shock them the most. He also learned the value of patience. Days, weeks, and even months of careful observation were necessary to understand the full scope of the overseer's routines. He couldn't afford mistakes. Every glance, every whisper, and every small interaction with fellow enslaved workers had to be precise. During this time, he remained outwardly submissive, blending into the background while quietly gathering intelligence. His ability to act inconspicuously while mentally plotting made him almost invisible, a silent predator in plain sight. By the time he was ready to act, he had transformed the plantation into a mental blueprint. He knew where each overseer would be at certain times, their habits, their fears, and their blind spots. This meticulous observation didn't just increase his chances of success, it ensured that his plan would strike with precision. The result was a carefully orchestrated strategy that combined intelligence, timing, and courage. In a world designed to suppress him, he had turned awareness into a weapon, preparing for a moment that would leave the overseers shocked, and the plantation forever changed. Once he had spent months studying the overseers, the enslaved man moved from observation to action. This was not a reckless move fueled by anger. It was a carefully calculated plan that required precision, patience, and nerves of steel. He knew that a single misstep could cost him his life, so every detail had to be perfect. From the timing of each action to the positioning of the overseers, he crafted a strategy that relied on exploiting weaknesses he had painstakingly documented. He used his knowledge of the overseers' routines to choose the exact moment when they were most vulnerable. Certain overseers had predictable habits, walking alone at specific times, leaning on railings, or focusing too intently on punishing workers. By targeting these moments, he could minimize risk and maximize impact. His plan wasn't about brute force, it was about intelligence, observation, and cunning. Every move was calculated to surprise, confuse, and overpower without drawing immediate suspicion. Clever tactics were key to his success. He devised methods to execute his plan subtly, using tools, environmental advantages, and psychological tricks. For example, he might have used shadows, reflections, or distractions to mislead the overseers, luring them into vulnerable positions. He understood that the element of surprise was his greatest ally. The more he could exploit their assumptions that enslaved workers were submissive and powerless, the more effective his actions would be. He also coordinated his plan with patience and timing. Some parts had to be executed alone, while others required discreet help or observation from fellow enslaved workers. Every second mattered, and miscalculations could lead to disaster. This combination of precision, patience, and ingenuity allowed him to orchestrate something that seemed almost impossible, a daring act that would leave the overseers stunned and unable to respond quickly. Ultimately, his meticulous planning demonstrated a remarkable blend of courage, intelligence, and strategy. What many might have assumed impossible, challenging the authority of 19 overseers, was made feasible by careful thought and careful execution. This wasn't just rebellion, it was a masterclass in tactical planning under extreme conditions. In a world designed to suppress him, he turned strategy into power, proving that intellect and bravery could challenge even the most brutal systems. When the time finally came to execute his plan, the enslaved man relied on a method both daring and precise. He didn't use brute force or weapons in the traditional sense. Instead, he exploited the overseers' trust in routine and their own carelessness. Every move was calculated to achieve maximum impact with minimal risk of immediate capture. This wasn't just an act of revenge. It was a clever, surgical strike against a system designed to keep him powerless. He took advantage of the overseer's predictable habits, striking when they were most vulnerable and least alert. Some were isolated, others distracted by work or supervising the fields. Using the environment to his advantage, whether it was sudden darkness, dust, or a cleverly timed distraction, he was able to execute his plan with precision. The act itself required nerves of steel, as even a slight hesitation could have meant death. Each step was deliberate, ensuring that the overseers would be incapacitated before they had any chance to react. The tools and tactics he used were likely simple, yet effective. Historical accounts suggest that enslaved people often turned everyday objects into instruments of resistance, whether to blind, distract, or disable oppressors. What mattered most wasn't complexity, but the clever application of available resources. By understanding both human psychology and physical opportunity, he could make the overseers vulnerable without exposing himself. The brilliance of his method lay in its subtlety. It was a strike that seemed almost impossible, yet executed flawlessly. Equally important was the speed and coordination of his actions. He needed to act quickly, ensuring that once the overseers were blinded or disoriented, they couldn't call for help or retaliate immediately. Timing was everything. A pause of even a few seconds could have unraveled the entire plan. His ability to move with quiet precision and confidence shows just how much preparation had gone into this moment. Every overseer incapacitated was a testament to his intelligence and courage. In the end, the method he employed didn't just achieve immediate results, it sent a powerful message. 19 overseers, men who had wielded absolute control over lives, were suddenly powerless, facing the consequences of underestimating the intelligence and determination of those they oppressed. This act of audacious cunning became a symbol of resistance, proof that even in the darkest conditions of slavery, strategic thinking, courage, and meticulous planning could challenge the most brutal authority. The moment the enslaved man executed his daring plan, chaos erupted across the plantation. The overseers, who had ruled the fields with fear and intimidation, were suddenly disoriented and unable to respond. Some stumbled blindly, others screamed in shock, unable to comprehend how a single person could strike so effectively. Their authority, which had seemed absolute, crumbled in an instant. It was a moment of disbelief, a sudden, shocking reversal of power that left everyone on edge. For the other enslaved workers, the scene was both terrifying and exhilarating. Fear of punishment still lingered, but it was tempered by a spark of hope and awe. They had witnessed a rare, bold act of resistance, something that demonstrated that the seemingly unbreakable system of control could be challenged. Whispers spread quickly through the fields as workers cautiously observed the stunned overseers, realizing that courage and intelligence could indeed tilt the balance, even if only momentarily. The overseers' confusion created a window of opportunity, but it also fueled panic. Some tried to regroup, calling for assistance or attempting to rally the others, but the disarray made coordinated action nearly impossible. The psychological shock of being outwitted by someone they had considered powerless amplified their fear and frustration. For a few moments, the plantation itself seemed to hold its breath, caught between the old order of control and the new, unpredictable reality imposed by the enslaved man's actions. Meanwhile, subtle but crucial acts of solidarity occurred among the enslaved workers. Some discreetly assisted by providing cover, while others ensured no one was immediately exposed to retaliation. This quiet cooperation highlighted a larger truth. Resistance was not just the work of one individual, but often a collective effort of courage, trust, and intelligence. Though the overseers remained a threat, these moments demonstrated that careful planning and unity could challenge even the harshest oppression. The aftermath of the initial shock left an indelible mark on the plantation. The overseers had been humbled, and the enslaved workers had glimpsed the power of clever defiance. Fear and awe coexisted in a tense, volatile atmosphere. This was more than an isolated act of rebellion. It was a psychological turning point, a vivid demonstration that oppression could be confronted, and that even under the most brutal conditions, human ingenuity and courage could momentarily overturn the established order. The aftermath of the enslaved man's daring act sent shockwaves through the plantation. The immediate effect was panic among the overseers, who had always relied on fear and intimidation to maintain control. With several of them incapacitated, the usual order of the plantation was disrupted. Tasks were left unfinished, workers hesitated, and the atmosphere became tense and uncertain. Even a few hours of disrupted authority revealed just how fragile the system really was. For the enslaved workers, the short-term consequences were a mix of relief, hope, and fear. While the act demonstrated the possibility of resistance, they also knew that retaliation could be swift and brutal. Some workers stayed alert, ready to protect themselves and others, while whispers of awe and admiration spread. This brief moment of empowerment reminded them that courage, intelligence, and careful planning could challenge the oppressive system, even if only temporarily. The plantation owners and remaining overseers scrambled to restore control. New overseers were summoned, and the injured were treated, but the psychological impact lingered. The sudden blinding of 19 overseers became a cautionary tale, one that would be remembered not just for the physical damage, but for the message it sent. Authority could be undermined, even on a large plantation, and the illusion of invincibility shattered in a single calculated act. Security measures were tightened in the short term. Plantation managers increased supervision, reinforced routines, and tried to prevent any similar acts of defiance. However, the enslaved man's actions had already altered the dynamics of fear. Workers now knew that careful observation, patience, and courage could yield significant results. Even as control was superficially restored, the power of intellect and strategy became a new, invisible threat to the overseer's dominance. Ultimately, the short-term consequences went beyond physical injuries and panic. They reshaped perceptions of power, courage, and resistance on the plantation. The enslaved man's audacity proved that intelligence and bravery could disrupt even the most oppressive systems. These consequences, both immediate and psychological, set the stage for lasting changes in how enslaved workers viewed their own agency and how overseers viewed those they believed they controlled completely. The audacious act of blinding 19 overseers didn't just shake the plantation, it sent ripples through the surrounding communities. News of the incident traveled quickly, whispered from one plantation to the next. Among the enslaved, it became a story of inspiration, a powerful example that oppression could be challenged with courage, intelligence, and careful planning. People began to see that even in the harshest conditions, acts of resistance were possible, and hope, though fragile, could survive. Plantation owners and local authorities were equally affected, but in a very different way. The incident sparked fear and unease, challenging their assumptions of total control. Many became more cautious, realizing that enslaved people were not passive victims, but capable of strategy and cunning. This heightened awareness sometimes led to harsher oversight, but it also inadvertently acknowledged the mental and strategic capabilities of those they enslaved. In a sense, the enslaved man's actions forced a begrudging respect for ingenuity born out of desperation. Local communities of enslaved people began sharing stories and lessons learned from the event. The narrative of a single person outsmarting multiple overseers became a symbol of resilience and clever defiance. Oral histories passed down these stories, emphasizing bravery, intelligence, and the importance of observation and patience. These stories reinforced solidarity and encouraged subtle forms of resistance, from feigned compliance to clever sabotage, creating a culture of quiet empowerment among the oppressed. The long-term perception shift wasn't limited to fear or admiration. It also changed the social dynamics on plantations. Overseers became more cautious, sometimes second-guessing their actions, while enslaved workers realized the power of strategy over brute force. Even small acts of autonomy or clever defiance started to gain significance, showing that rebellion wasn't always about open confrontation. It could be intellectual, calculated, and highly effective. This mental shift laid the groundwork for other acts of resistance throughout the region, influencing generations. Ultimately, the incident became more than a local anecdote. It became a historical marker of defiance against impossible odds. It demonstrated that courage and intellect could challenge entrenched power structures and inspired countless stories of resistance in the American South. The long-term impact of this event was a subtle yet profound reminder: enslaved individuals were not merely victims of their circumstances. They were thinkers, strategists, and warriors in their own right, capable of reshaping perceptions and redefining what resistance could look like. This incident is more than just a dramatic tale from a single plantation. It represents a larger narrative of rebellion and survival among enslaved people throughout the United States. In a society built on absolute control and systemic oppression, acts like this were rare but immensely powerful. They revealed that, despite being stripped of freedom and basic rights, enslaved individuals were capable of ingenuity, courage, and strategic thinking. This story stands as a reminder that resistance took many forms, not always through escape or open revolt, but also through careful, calculated defiance. The broader significance also lies in how it challenged the assumptions of power. Overseers and slave owners operated under the belief that fear and violence alone could maintain control. But this event proved otherwise, that intelligence, patience, and bravery could disrupt even the most rigid systems. Across the South, such stories contributed to a growing awareness that enslaved people were not passive or submissive. They were active agents, capable of changing the dynamics of power. It forced the oppressors to reconsider the fragility of their authority. Moreover, this story reflects the theme of survival under extreme oppression. Survival wasn't just about physical endurance, it was also about mental resilience, observation, and timing. The enslaved man's actions show that true survival often required strategy, cunning, and calculated risk-taking. By using his mind as a weapon, he didn't just protect himself, he created a momentary shift in the balance of power, proving that survival could also be an act of defiance. This tale also highlights the ripple effect of individual courage. One person's daring act of rebellion could inspire others, shaping a culture of resistance even under strict surveillance. Oral histories and whispered stories carried lessons of strategy, patience, and bravery to other enslaved communities. The story became a symbol of hope, showing that even in seemingly hopeless circumstances, thoughtful, courageous actions could leave a lasting mark on history. Finally, the significance of this story resonates today as a testament to the human spirit. It's a powerful reminder that intelligence, courage, and moral courage can challenge injustice, even when the odds are overwhelmingly against you. In the context of history, it encourages us to recognize the agency and resilience of enslaved people, celebrating their ability to resist oppression through strategy, wit, and unwavering bravery. This story isn't just a historical curiosity, it's a timeless lesson in the power of human resilience and resistance. The story of this enslaved man is ultimately a story of courage in its purest form. Courage here wasn't just about physical bravery. It was about the audacity to think strategically, to challenge an entire system built to crush the human spirit, and to act despite overwhelming danger. Every step he took required mental fortitude, as even the smallest mistake could have meant a brutal punishment or death. His courage wasn't reckless, it was deliberate, calculated, and inspiring, showing that bravery often takes the form of careful planning combined with unwavering resolve. Intelligence played a central role in his resistance. While brute force alone would have been impossible against so many overseers, his sharp mind became his most powerful weapon. He analyzed patterns, observed weaknesses, and exploited the overseers' assumptions. This story reminds us that intelligence and ingenuity can be as powerful as physical strength when confronting oppression. By thinking several steps ahead, he transformed what seemed like an impossible situation into a moment of victory, proving that strategic thinking can be a form of rebellion. Resistance, as demonstrated here, took many forms. It wasn't a loud public uprising, it was quiet, calculated, and precise. This highlights the creativity required for enslaved individuals to assert agency under constant surveillance and threat of violence. Resistance wasn't only about survival, it was a statement of human dignity, a refusal to be silenced or broken. Every clever tactic, every moment of careful planning, became a small act of defiance that carried profound meaning, both for the individual and for the community around him. The story also teaches us about the ripple effect of courageous action. One person's daring move can shift perceptions, inspire others, and challenge the assumptions of even the most powerful oppressors. This act of blinding 19 overseers became more than an immediate victory. It became a symbol, echoing through the lives of fellow enslaved workers and beyond. Courage, intelligence, and resistance were contagious, and even small victories could resonate widely, altering the psychological and social landscape of oppression. Ultimately, this story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. It reminds us that even in the darkest circumstances, individuals can find ways to assert control, challenge injustice, and reclaim dignity. The enslaved man's actions exemplify how courage, intelligence, and strategic resistance can combine to create moments of profound impact. His story is a lasting lesson. Oppression can be confronted, authority can be challenged, and even in the harshest conditions, human ingenuity and bravery can leave a mark that echoes through history.